too early. I wasn't paying attention to the countdown.
I
Good
think we're
evening,
good.
everybody, and welcome to the Gnostic Agnostics. I am Derrick Day. I am your Gnostic Stoic / humanist, and my buddy over here is.
I am Aaron Tomlinson, your Gnostic mystic / metaphysician. Did I get that right this
That's
time?
it, man. You nailed it.
Sweet.
So, what is in the glass? Let's start with that first, and then we'll move on from there.
I am drinking a Chardonnay tonight. Chardonnay. I like that in the summer.
Yep, Chardonnay is good in the summer. It's light, it's refreshing,
Mhm.
and for some reason, I think that it really doesn't mess with your head as much as say red wine does.
No,
I think
I
red
agree.
wine is heavy in the summer, but I'm in the air conditioning right now, so I don't really care. So today, want to talk about something that I think is really key to the whole understanding the Gnostic explication or revelation or unpacking of
Mhm.
spirituality. And I say spirituality because first of all, and Aaron, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I don't want to do is I don't want to get into a Christian loop.
Right.
uh, that what we're talking about, the whole thing about Gnosticism is getting people out of the religious loop. And one of the things that I have seen is that people say, "Well, I become spiritual, but I'm hanging on to Jesus as my touchstone or savior."
Mhm.
And what I think is, I think that Jesus can be a guide, that Jesus can be well, I mean, let an egregore,
Mhm.
you know, but when you say the whole savior thing, basically what you're doing, and this is my opinion, I could be wrong, that what you're doing is you're kind of setting yourself up to stay religious. You're hanging on to this religious aspect of it. And one of the things that I hope to do in this deep dive into Gnosticism that we're going to do for I don't know how many days, weeks, months, or years that we're going to be doing this,
Right.
but uh, is to help people divorce their spirituality from an archetype. In other words, I think the spirituality is bigger and broader than any book, than any religion, than any belief system.
Mhm.
And I think that when we begin to explore this in honesty and in earnest, that we're going to have a better definition of spirituality. So anyway, so what we're talking about tonight, to get right into the topic, because I don't want to ramble, and it's, does Gnosticism require belief to be suspended? In other words, gnosis, the word gnosis literally means knowledge. It means esoteric or hidden knowledge,
Mhm.
right? So if you look at it from a literal standpoint, and again, one of the things we're trying to do is get away from flat renderings of things. To use your terminology, Aaron, that the map is not the territory.
Right.
The map is going to be flat, right?
Right.
It's going to be skeuomorphic, and that's pretty much how it is.
Right.
But territory, when you look at territory, you see the terrain, you see the peaks, the crevices, the valleys, and all of that, right? So does Gnosticism, when we say knowledge, does that mean that we automatically suspend belief? And this is where I hope to help a lot of our brothers and sisters that are in Christianity, because then you can ask the converse of that and say, do you have to suspend belief to have knowledge?
Mhm.
Right? Because at the end of the day, I think that the sweet spot is, and I'm kind of going to the closing before I preach, uh, is the sweet spot is the intersection between knowing and believing. In other words, you know what you believe and you believe
Right.
what you know.
Right.
So, in traditional Christianity, it's like faith is everything. It says, blessed are those who have not seen and believe. But Gnosticism turns this all on its head. It says, no, no, K-N-O-W, no, N-O, comma, K-N-O-W. Don't just believe.
Mhm.
Question it, deconstruct it, reconstruct it, transcend it, right? So this is where we're breaking out our shovels and our pickaxes and going in for the beautiful golden nuggets of
Yeah,
Gnosticism.
I like that.
So that, Aaron, is my opening, and I will pour myself a glass of Merlot while you are.
All right. So, yeah, I was thinking about this, and you know, everybody believes something. Just as simple as, like you said, I don't know how my car works. If it breaks down, I don't know what's wrong with it, but I know I can get into it and drive, right?
Mhm.
So you could say, well, that's knowing based on experience, which it is. It's a belief based on experience, right? We know the sun's going to come up tomorrow. It may not. I mean, an asteroid could hit the Earth, or you could die in your sleep, right? And if
Yeah.
you die in your sleep, then the sun doesn't come up for you. But you believe, you cross a bridge, you believe that bridge is going to hold up, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of that's based on experience. The difference with religious faith, religious belief, is we have to deny our own experience in order to trust someone else's experience or someone else's ideas of what God or life or spirituality or your life, my life, what it all means. And so as I was thinking about this and I was trying to come up with some illustrations, let's just take belief in hell, belief in heaven,
Mm.
belief in eternal conscious torment. And right now, where I'm at currently, I may not go as far as you, and maybe we're saying the same thing. I think it's okay if people, like you said, look at Jesus as a guide, as a teacher, as someone they want to emulate his teachings, or even if they have a relationship with Jesus, meaning whatever that means to them. They pray to him, they sense his presence, they see him in visionary encounters, whatever the case may be. The real difference for me is this sin, fall, and redemption idea. This
Yeah.
idea that you have to believe in Jesus, you have to follow Jesus, you have to believe the faith of the church, be baptized, whatever, in order to not experience this place that they tell us about, which is hell and eternal conscious torment and things like that.
Yeah.
The thing that's so anybody that believes in Jesus as a savior to escape hell and gain heaven is not doing that based on any direct personal knowledge.
Right.
Right. Now, I remember a while, several years ago, I'm taking my children, and this individual had offered to take them up flying in an airplane, right?
Mhm.
And so we agreed to do this, and I didn't know this person. Someone else had arranged it and set it up. Their kids were coming as well. And we get into this plane, and I kid you not, I think the guy told me that it was built in the 1950s.
Mm.
It looked like it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be ugly, but the guy that was the pilot, he and I had just met, and he looked like he could stroke out or have a heart attack at any moment.
Ouch.
So I'd have no way of knowing that we're going to be safe on this trip, right? None at all. But I trust my friend that set it up and knew the pilot, and I trusted that the pilot was going to make
So
it.
you were walking by faith and not by sight.
I really was. I was trusting someone else. But again, it's a trust that's based on their direct experience. They knew this person. They were letting their children get into the airplane, et cetera, and so on, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to heaven and hell, when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus, when it comes to the life and teaching of Jesus, there is nobody that can say they're making that belief based on direct experience, except unless there are some people that have had near-death experiences and they report to us that in their near-death experience, I'm thinking of like Kenneth Hagin, there was another guy in the Pentecostal movement, Howard Pittman, that they thought they were saved, they died, they went to hell, they called on Jesus, they got saved, they went to heaven, and they come back and they share those things. All right. So that would be as close to my airplane story as I can get, right?
Yeah.
But there is another path. Most people don't even do that. Most people aren't listening to, what was that book that came out, 22 Minutes in Hell or some shit like that.
Yeah.
And who knows, who knows if those people even experience that? Like, you can't verify their experience. But when it comes to the teachings of Jesus, the stuff that's recorded for us in the scriptures, the crucifixion, the resurrection, that stuff was 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So there's nobody that was an eyewitness. And then you can say, well, we got these texts that we take as eyewitness texts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. However, it's pretty much accepted that those weren't written by eyewitness testimonies. Even the most conservative, I don't even know the most conservative person, the most conservative King James only Bible believing Christian that's looked at it honestly, they can come back and say the writers of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were the actual eyewitnesses of the event. Now, they can make an argument that it was was transmitted orally, oral tradition from the eyewitnesses, and then it was written down. But at the end of the day, that's how I would differentiate between gnosis and religious faith, using that as an example. We have to just take the word of someone else completely on blind faith without any good rational explanation, philosophical explanation, and certainly no empirical evidence.
Yep.
So give me 1 second. I need to close my door, so I'll be right back, and I'm going to kick it over to you.
All right. Well, you bring up something really, really key here is that, and I'm going to get back to the heaven and hell thing, but when you're talking about like the empiricality of the scriptures, right? That the most conservative scriptures will concede that the oldest known scripture is Mark, and that's 70 CE, which is basically 2 generations downwind of the crucifixion. So, that's not a reliable witness because it's not an eyewitness account, right?
Right.
But to be fair, we're diving into Gnosticism.
Yep.
And the Gnostic books are about the same age.
Yep.
There are some that are earlier, but none are contemporaneous, right? So no matter what, we're talking about something for which there is no eyewitness account, right? Now I say this sometimes to the chagrin and the cringing of others that, that Jesus couldn't have existed because there's no contemporaneous evidence, no archaeological or anthropological evidence. And I'm not debating that point tonight. That's not where I'm going. I'm going to stay within the guardrails. And it's that, so the Gnostic Gospels, the Gnostic books, the Gnostic papers, they fail that same litmus test, right?
Absolutely.
And here I go. I'm like Sir Mix-a-Lot because I like big butts and I cannot lie.
A big butt.
It's a big butt. It's a very big butt. It's a big juicy butt. And it's this, that what's in the Gnostic text veers significantly than what we have in the Orthodox Gospels, right?
Yep.
And so then it becomes like, okay, why accept one set of texts over another? And this is where now I'm going to inject my own subjectivity here,
Mhm.
And that's that what's in the Gnostic books makes more sense
Mhm.
to me. And not only does it make more sense, but when you look at the Orthodox Gospels, right? The Orthodox Gospels, what theologians do is they play a game of connect the dots with the Pauline Gospels and the other, the other post gospel texts, and they make associations that may or may not be accurate, but they make inferences and associations, right? But I think that the Gnostic texts are a better fit. If we're putting together a mosaic or a puzzle, that the Gnostic texts make things fit better and it makes more sense. You get a better rendering, and you like, again, to use your analogy with the map not being the territory, that like you have these maps that show elevation in a flat rendering, so they do these outlines to show what the varying elevation is at different points in this on the map. And so I think that what happens is that when we get the Gospels and the Pauline text, that we get something flat with no elevation, right? But when we apply the Gospels, we're still looking at the map and not the territory, but we're at least seeing the elevational changes in the map based on the drawings, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I wanted to talk about, because you talked about heaven and hell, and I want to really hit this real quick, because in the Orthodox Christianity, it's like hell is eternal punishment for sin. It's eternal conscious torment.
Yep.
But when we look at Gnosticism, right? Gnosticism, hell is a state of ignorance and bondage to the material. And Aaron, as you pointed out, right, that we tend to, even in spiritual matters, we tend to fall into naturalism, fairly easily, because we'll say, okay, I believe this, this supernatural, this metaphysical, but I'm my five senses have kicked in, and now I'm thrown a little off my square by this, right? But in Gnosticism, it's like, I'm going to say something that's going to probably get me into trouble, but I'm going to say it anyway, and that's that Gnosticism almost takes the whole matrix concept and turns it into a spiritual reality. In other words, that this is not reality. This is the prison that our real selves are contained in. Right. So the objective of Gnosticism is to obtain this knowledge to transcend the physical, the natural, and operate in the pure spiritual, right? And so then you talk about heaven, and heaven in the Orthodox Christianity, it's like a reward, for faith and moral obedience. If you trust God, if you hold on to His unchanging hand, and you get this reward, and you get your harp and your wings and your robe, and you get to float around and and sing holy, holy, holy for the rest of eternity. Which, if that's heaven, I honestly don't. That would be boring as fuck. That's just me. Yeah. But what heaven is in Gnosticism is like, it's reunion or rejoining with the divine through knowledge, through this inner knowing. And so when we look at Gnosticism versus Orthodox Christianity, we have to unpack these things, because one of the things about Gnosticism is it's going to really, how can I say this? It's going to upset you. And when I say upset, I'm not talking about like it's going to piss you off. It might, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like your balance, your spiritual balance, your sense of being. That it will throw you off kilter, because the things that are being said and taught here run almost contrary. They're almost perpendicular to what you read in the Gospels. So then one more thing, this is the bonus one, right? Salvation, right? So Salvation comes through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and that we believe on his perfect sacrifice, and we believe on his blood and the power of his blood to atone for sin. But in Gnosticism, it's self-knowledge and awakening to the source. In other words, there's an old Greek saying, "Physician, heal thyself." Right? And when you're getting into Gnosticism, you're not looking for an external source of how do I get better? How do I atone for my wicked thoughts and my wicked speech and all of that? No, it's in Gnostic teaching. It's like all about self-knowledge. It's understanding what's within. And when you understand what's within, then you understand what's without. And that's when the as above, so below really starts to hit home. Because now it's like whatever is external to you is also internal to you. And this kind of fits with the model we talked about consciousness as being an all-encompassing field, right?
Yep.
So now we're plugging into this spiritual internet,
mm-hmm.
and we're able to access this in order to understand us.
Yep.
Right. So anyway, that's my response to what you were saying, because I wanted to talk about the heaven and hell thing while you were there, but also talk about how does Gnosticism differ in terms of the salvation and redemption model?
Yep. I agree with everything you said. There's not even a little but in there.
Oh, wow.
But there's a big and. I would just add to what you were saying about the text, because you make a really brilliant point. Like we would almost look foolish saying, okay, you can't necessarily trust Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because we don't have any eyewitnesses to it. We don't have any evidence, like you point out. There's no archaeological, anthropological evidence, all that stuff. But then we're saying, but we're over here with this Gnostic text. It can look like we're really just speaking out of both sides of our mouth, right?
Exactly.
Here's the difference for me, and I agree with everything you said. The difference to me is the teachings of Orthodox Christianity 100% depend upon eyewitness testimony, true or not, passed down, of the physical life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. They depend on it. You cannot have faith for a Savior if you don't believe a Savior came. You can't have faith for the Son of God if you don't believe the Son of God came.
Right.
And the Orthodox teachings point you to believe in Jesus as your Savior, follow Jesus, make him Lord of your life, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
The Gnostic teachings don't do that. The Gnostic teachings don't depend on any historical information whatsoever. Because for Gnosticism, it's about inner revelation, inner experience, discovering the divine that is within you. And it's actually about honoring your individual personal experience above and beyond the experience.
Yes.
And this is why Gnosticism and Orthodox Christianity locked horns, and why the Orthodox were determined to stamp out, get rid of, destroy, eradicate Gnostic texts, because the Gnostics were coming along and saying, no, this wasn't the teaching of Jesus. This isn't why he came. This isn't the nature of reality, and it has nothing to do with the afterlife. Rather, they say, the Orthodox would say Jesus came as the exception. Gnostics would say Jesus came as the example, that he came as the rule, that he came and lived out and gave us teaching so that we could discover who we were and become what he is, right?
Yep.
So the difference is, and I love that you brought up this whole thing about, hell from a Gnostic perspective is ignorance and bondage to physicality and bondage to this world as a prison, because
real quick, that's something you helped deliver me from, right? Or you helped me to find deliverance from within myself, because I got very materialist.
Yeah.
Very naturalistic, and there's more to it.
Well, so Gnostic salvation is about remembering who you are.
Yeah.
Remembering. The message is humanity forgot, right? Each of you forgot. You don't know who you are. And through this inner work, this inner journey, this reliance upon personal experience, you can discover who you are and connect that way. You don't have to go through a mediator. You don't have to go through a priesthood. You don't have to go through Jesus as Savior and Lord or intercessor or high priest or any of that stuff. And so here's the difference. If it's about remembering who you are, I could invoke, or a memory, let me say it this way, a memory that you have, Derrick, or I have, or anybody has, can be invoked through all kinds of different means. It could be a scent. It could be that, your grandmother always made pancakes for breakfast in the morning.
Yep.
And you get the smell of pancakes. Oh, I remember Grandma used to do this. It could be that one of your siblings or your cousins says, hey, remember when Grandma did this? That's auditory, right? They're directing you through their words. One's coming through the olfactories, through the sense of smell. Oh, that memory's coming alive. You're talking about times we had with Grandma. Oh, the memories are coming alive. It could be a specific date. Maybe it's her birthday, or maybe it's the day that she passed. And you're commemorating that date. And so that makes you think about Grandma, right? So for the Gnostics, what they're saying is you've just forgotten who you are, and Jesus came to help you remember, but they never claim exclusively that this is the only way you can remember.
Correct.
In fact, Platonism will help you remember. Neoplatonism will help you remember. Hermetic teaching will help you remember. The Kabbalah, which really came about in the Renaissance period and during the time of the Inquisitions and stuff. Kabbalah is all based on this remembering. There are aspects of yoga and Hinduism that are based on this sort of self-discovery, and they're all getting you to the same place. So whereas the Orthodox say you have to trust this testimony, and this is the only way you can come.
Yeah.
And I know we like to do fun stuff, and I do it too, and I'm not arguing. I don't want to argue this point. But I know we look at, John 14:3 or whatever it is. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Yep.
And we say that is means, your own I am, your own being, your own presence.
That's my definition of it.
And I have no problem interpreting it that way.
Yeah.
My thought about the actual historicity and inclusion of the Gospel of John in the canon is that the emphasis in John's gospel is that Jesus is unique, that he is the only begotten of the Father, and that the only way, to as many as received him, to them he gave the power to become children of God, right? Yeah. For God so loved the world. You don't have to use John 14 to say Jesus is the only way. Just use John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him might have everlasting life. And so, an interesting take that I think one of the scholars on Gnosticism, I think it was April DeConnick, had in her study of the Gospel of John. She's like, there's so many Gnostic elements in John's Gospel, or mystical elements in John's Gospel, but John's Gospel was included specifically because it emphasizes the uniqueness of Jesus. And she postulates this idea that there was a conflict between the followers of, let's say, Mark or Matthew, and the followers of the Gospel of Thomas or Philip, which is why those specific disciples are singled out, and specifically why Thomas is singled out at the end. You quoted this earlier. Blessed is he who has not seen and has believed. If you read through John's gospel, Thomas is the slow coach. Thomas is the remedial student. Thomas is the one that's on an IEP, right? He's the one that needs a little bit extra help to get it. He's the one that said, I will not believe unless I have personal experiential knowledge, unless I can see him, unless I can touch him, etc., and so on. And John comes along and says, has Jesus appear to him and then say, you're blessed because you've seen and you believe, but how much more blessed? So it looks like a very subtle way of building up orthodoxy in opposition to Gnosticism, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so I don't know why I went on that big long diatribe about the Gospel of John, but I think the point is that the Gnostic Gospels themselves never make these claims.
No.
The Orthodox Gospels do make these claims. If we take both at face value, then having the preserved written word of Scripture is essential to this faith, because you can have no experiential personal knowledge of it. You and I have, we've talked about people we love, that they've kind of shit canned the Bible in a lot of ways, but they're still looking at Jesus, and the issue is like, hey, you guys wouldn't even know who Jesus is if it wasn't for the book. So, and that's just self-evident, because you can take someone who's never been exposed to it, that's never heard the gospel, that's never read the Bible. They've never heard of Jesus. They're not praying to Jesus. They're not following Jesus, right?
Right.
But they can still experience that internal divine light, divine spark, whatever you want to call it. And you can get there, again, like I said, through Platonism, through your own journey is the best way to get there, right? So that's the biggest difference between, like, where I can say, okay, I appreciate the Gnostic texts not because I'm convinced that this is what Jesus actually came to say, but because I can take the content of it at face value, regardless of where it came from, and say this is something that I can use to elevate my consciousness, to improve my life, to help me remember, right? So, I mean, how many times have you talked to somebody that wasn't as smart, or maybe you thought they were foolish, or someone you just met on the street, you don't know anything about them, but they said something to you and you could hear the wisdom that was in the words, right?
Yep.
Could hear the wisdom that was in the words, and you could take that as your own. It doesn't matter where the source came from. Wisdom is justified by her children, not by her fathers. So wisdom is the proof in the pudding is in the eating. As you apply wisdom, you can experience for yourself whether or not those are things that you want in your life based on the wisdom that you heard. It's not based on, so therefore, Jesus said, wisdom is justified by her children. And I'm adding, not by her fathers or her mothers. In other words, not by the source of it, but by the content of it.
Yep. Now, it's really cool that you brought up John, right? Because I think that John is also the bridge between the Gnostic and the Orthodox. And what I mean by that is that, when there's a lot that Jesus said and did in John that he didn't do in the other, I guess what they call the synoptic gospels, that that happened there. And there's a lot of bracketing that goes on. What do I mean by that? John chapter 1 is a bracket. John didn't write that. Right. Jesus didn't write it.
Right.
Where did it come from? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Who's saying that, and why? Because if you look at that in comparison to the rest of John's narrative, which, by the way, I'm just going to throw this out here because I like tossing grenades. I think that the actual writer of John was Lazarus.
Oh, interesting. I like that.
Yeah, because it said the disciple who Jesus loved, and why would John be singled out to be loved by Jesus, but Lazarus clearly was loved by Jesus.
I like that.
So anyway, but that's another topic for another time. But I think that the editors of the text, they inserted some things in to give heft, to give gravitas to what else John was saying, because and then also I think that John, like First Corinthians was probably more Gnostic in its essence, but there were things added to it to fortify the Orthodox narrative. I'm getting into some deep theological headspace here, and I'm not, and I don't necessarily want to do that. But the one thing is, excuse me, hair. Um, we're talking about like belief versus knowledge, right? And so, we're talking about bracketing assumptions. So John had a lot of assumptions, and there were brackets placed around it in text to provide substance to it, right? And I think that the reason why is that had John not had these brackets, that it would become more Gnostic and less dependent upon belief. So if you didn't have these brackets, then you would have to suspend belief in order to process John. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So belief is challenging, right? Because belief clouds perception, and
it does.
to know things, we have to kind of put belief into a box.
Yep.
Right. But the challenge is, and this is where I throw a bone to my Christian brothers and sisters, is that you can't just discard belief, because belief helps us process some things, because like you gave the example of the car. And I'm going to use a more esoteric example. You and I are both sitting in chairs. We're sitting in chairs, and we don't ask the chair, hey, chair, hey, I weigh 218 pounds. Can you hold me? Chair, are you going to be able to keep me up during the entire span of this episode? We ask these, hey, chair, are you going to be level enough that I can drink my drink without spilling it? There are some things that we, and so let me say this, because I've said this in my atheism. When I was going through atheism, I said, okay, I don't believe in anything. I have confidence in what is tangible, measurable, and repeatable. But when you look at something like a chair, or you look at something like a car, or we get on airplanes. We get on airplanes every fucking day. And an airplane is about as close to magic as humans can produce.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't ask, are these engines capable of producing the thrust? Are these control surfaces able to balance the plane in the air? Is the navigational equipment sufficient to get us to our we don't ask. We believe, right? So there is belief. Belief helps to give you comfort in the face of the unknown.
Yep.
And that's okay, except when you say, okay, my belief now not just governs my life, but I have to make it govern others. And so this is where I think knowledge, when we get knowledge, we get understanding, we get a practical application of this. Now we can say, okay, I believe that I can dig deeper into this. I believe that I can learn more about consciousness. I believe that I can learn more about myself. Not saying that I believe that this, great sky wizard is going to punish us if we get sideways,
right.
Against his moral compass, right? And so the other thing too is that I think that when we talk about agnostics, because we call ourselves Gnostic Agnostics, and this agnostic space is sacred. This is a divine space, because it is the space where you are in suspension or tension between the known and the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And so it's okay, it's not skepticism for the sake of rebellion, is reverence for the unknown.
Yeah.
I
would even one that's a little more, because like you're bringing up the chair, really good illustration, but it's still empirical. It's still concrete. I can give you some examples of how beliefs are necessary, because that used to drive me nuts when I would hear atheists say, well, I don't believe in anything. I'm like, hell you don't, because it's impossible. From a psychological perspective, you sound like an idiot when you say that. I'm going to tell you right now, there are a lot of people, when atheists say that, you sound like a fucking idiot. And I know that might be offensive, but you need to hear that if you want to have credibility in your message with people.
Yeah.
And so here's one way. So I think it's better to differentiate, and I'm trying to help atheists out here, not hurt them.
Yeah.
It is better to differentiate between dogma and belief. Because when they say I don't believe in anything, I really think what they're saying is I don't have dogmas. I don't dogmatically believe in this no matter what.
Right.
Like, I've made up my mind, don't confuse me with the facts. I think that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But when you say belief, Derrick, do you believe in a future?
Absolutely.
Do you believe in a future for you and Maya?
Yeah.
Do you believe in a future for your financial well-being?
Absolutely.
Do you believe that you're, all this effort that you're putting in on this incredible fitness journey that you have been on, that is just amazing? Do you believe that's going to help you live longer? Do you think that's going to contribute to your vitality? Do you believe if you share that with other people that it's going to help them in their future if they apply the same principles? Of course you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anybody that isn't guided by beliefs about their future is just floating in the wind. And even if it's just floating in the wind, there is some belief that I can't change. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to live for the moment.
Oh, let me throw something out there, Aaron. If we don't believe, if we don't have a belief for the future, if we don't have a belief for bettering ourselves, then why bother?
Exactly.
Why plan? Let's just live in the moment, and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, my point is you can't see it, you can't prove it. Whereas the chair, and I'm just thinking as you're bringing up that illustration, because, well, yeah, I've sat in this chair 100 times, so of course I know it's going to hold me. I've driven my car thousands and thousands and thousands of times, so I know it's going to start when, maybe not this particular car, but I generally know how cars work in sense of how to operate them, right? And so I wanted to give something that's not concrete, that every single person out there does every single day. Where they're exercising faith in something that is unseen, where they're exercising faith in something that is not tangible at the moment, that's not concrete at the moment. Now, to your point about suspending belief, here's where I think, again, Gnosticism has an edge, because you begin to approach spirituality with experience as feedback rather than something to be denied.
Ooh.
So I have to deny my experience that I've never had a prayer answered in my life in order to believe if I pray in Jesus' name that God's going to answer my prayer. I have to suspend my experience and belief that dead people rise and live forever in order to believe that Jesus rose and lived forever, right? Gnosticism says that you try something out, you explore, and then there's a feedback based on what happens, what doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And this is where, like, I almost cringe, because I almost made a post a while back where I was talking about my past ministry, and really I was as much a healing evangelist as anybody.
Yeah.
And I was going to say that, but then I thought, oh God, they're going to think I was like Benny Hinn or, Kenneth Copeland or some of these guys out there, because that's the only example they have, right?
Yeah.
Almost every person that taught, preached, performed healing that I knew, they were really heavy on the faith aspect to their own detriment. And here's what I mean by that. Well, we're going to pray for you, brother. And I don't see any change in you, but we're going to believe that you're healed anyway. And if you can just believe it enough, you're going to be healed.
Right.
We took a different approach that said, let's use how we pray for healing for people and develop a feedback mechanism based on results. Let's don't be principled about this.
Yeah.
Let's be super pragmatic about this.
Yeah.
And that allowed me and allowed those that were with me to adjust the model continually and consistently. So one of the things I found out doesn't work at all is somebody coming up, praying as hard as they can, crying out, hoping and praying in tongues, confessing the word, believing God. I'm just believing God. I'll never forget when I was in a meeting and I did a call for healing, and nobody came up. And I'm like looking at the pastor, like, what's up? And the pastor kind of comes back and says, well, nobody wants to confess that they're sick. And so nobody wants to admit they're sick because that would be a lack of faith. So I'm like, okay, well, let me admit it for him. You in the arm brace, come on up here. You with the oxygen tank,
Yeah.
get down here. But we would tell people, I would get people up there, just shundai, just praying and going. And I would just completely stop them and say, stop. Just stop what you're doing. You can do that at home. Do that in your own private devotional time, whatever. That's between you and God, right? I want you to completely relax and let me do all the work. And what I found was that by tapping into energy and transferring energy into the person without saying a word, got way more results than all this hooping and hollering and worshiping and praying and praising and all the other stuff that we did. So
power of focus, power of agreement.
If you can't suspend your belief on principle in order to be pragmatic, then you cannot grow, if that makes sense. You cannot have your own experience as a feedback loop that informs you.
Yep. And this the thing is that, like, belief, if you hold on to it too tight, becomes a prison. Right? So when you begin to inquire, right? And this was a thing for me. It's like when I used to teach prayer, and this was a really big thing for me. And people used to come to me and they say, hey, want Brother Day to pray because Brother Day gets results. And my thing was, okay, if how you're praying today doesn't work, if it's not yielding a result, then you need to alter how you're doing it. And the only way you can alter how you're doing it is to know what you're doing so that you can know if what you're doing is right or wrong.
Yep.
So this is where, where you suspend belief and you say, okay, I need to place a premium on knowing.
Yep.
Because now and especially like if you're in a serious fight or flight situation, a life or death situation, it's like I need to know. I can't just be hoping and a wishing and a praying, And then this was the thing that would always irritate me about the whole prayer thing, is that you pray and it doesn't work, and not only do you not get the result that you're praying for, but you actually get something worse than what you were praying for.
I'm sorry for laughing. I shouldn't laugh, but I saw that over and over and over again. No, dude, it's not funny. I feel compassion in my heart for those people.
Listen, I feel bad for them too. But you know what, though, man? I'm laughing with you. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you because people will say, "Oh, well, we prayed for brother so and so or sister so and so, and they finally got their healing. They went on to be with Jesus." No, fuck no. It's like death is death and healing is healing. They're not the same thing. Now, could it be that this person is no longer in pain, no longer in misery, no longer suffering? Sure, I'll give you that. I'll concede that. But to say that death is healing, no. What that means is that your prayers failed, and you refuse to acknowledge that.
Correct.
And so this is where gnosis comes in, because then you can say, okay, we prayed for this time. It didn't happen. So now we need to go back and we need to adjust the formula. How are we praying? Are we praying with everybody in the room? Or are we praying with the faithful few? Are we praying in tongues, or are we praying in plain language? There's so many different variables.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, like, what Gnosticism says is that there is a knowing to unlocking the spiritual. In other words, there's a knowing to unlocking the unknowing. And let me give you another example, because we talked about cars, right? Is that when you get your car, you buy your car, they give you a key, right? And this key is instrumental in getting the car to do something, right? But do you really understand what's going on when you turn the key? No. Now, you can learn, and
Right.
understanding that will help you have a better understanding of how you relate to your car, how you maintain it, how how you drive it and things like that, because you understand the mechanics behind it. And so you're able to respect the mechanical process, and therefore you become a better car owner. But is it necessary that you know what happens that turns the key? No. But here's another point. What happens when you turn the key and the key doesn't do anything? Now you need to know something. You need to know, is it the battery? Is it the starter? Is it the engine control module? Is it the ignition switch? Now you need to know something, because you've done what you were supposed to do. You've done what is familiar to you. You've done what is comforting to you, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And so this is the tension between gnosis and belief. I get in my car, I turn the key because I believe it'll start. Okay, that's great, right? But if it doesn't, now what? You at this point, you need to suspend your belief and get into knowledge, because you need to understand what is esoterically preventing that car from doing what it's doing.
Yep, I agree 100%. I kind of lost my train of thought because I got lost in what you were saying. Not that I wasn't listening. I was just thinking about the car and the illustration.
Let me throw something out. I'm going to throw a question at you. Okay, how do we practice gnosis? Because again, we're talking about like I remember there was a book that I read, and I think you read this too. I think we talked about it before, but it's Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence.
Yeah.
Old text that it's
Yep.
like this Benedictine monk that wrote this book. But so you practice the presence of God, right? But which I always thought that's kind of disingenuous, because if God is ubiquitous, then the presence of God is also ubiquitous. But anyway, I'm not going down that rabbit hole. But how do we practice gnosis? How do we appropriate this the pursuit of this esoteric knowledge? How do we pursue it? How do we practice it? How do we make it practical in our lives?
Yeah. So a couple things I would say to that. Like if you, and I want to go back to using experience as a feedback loop, right? Like if you're praying and praying and praying and praying and praying and praying and praying, and it's only worked, 2% of the time, maybe what you're doing isn't working. So maybe you shouldn't do it anymore. You know what I mean? Yeah. But if you're bound by doctrines and bound by church teachings and stuff, you can't do that. So I think the first step is somehow you have to build faith in your own experience. You have to trust your own experience. Now, someone would say, well, okay, Aaron, like classic example, there are people that I've talked to that are atheists, and they have like I talked to one person, not anyone that, as far as I know, ever watches us. Yeah. But they were, they shared their one paranormal experience. And let me just say, it wasn't seeing Bigfoot or being abducted by aliens. It was one of those things where I was like, had to keep a straight face, because it was really, really, really ordinary for a paranormal experience. You know what I'm saying? So the question might come up, okay, Aaron, this person has had, about your same age, has had one paranormal experience in their life, and it was basically an object disappeared and they couldn't find it. Mm-hmm. That happens to me on a daily basis, but I have a little bit of ADHD, so forgive me for being skeptical based on my experience, right? So say, okay, Aaron, this person's following their own experience, and this is, that leads them to believe that there is no God, that there is no life after death, that everything is material, everything can be defined in physical terms, and that's the best way to go. You, on the other hand, are saying you've had all kinds of crazy experiences that half the people that I tell them probably don't believe. And so therefore, I have maintained my integrity in belief in God, at least as a transcendent concept. In other words, I don't like the word God. I would call it consciousness, call it whatever you want to call it. I like Thomas Campbell. I'm sure he's on the spectrum, but I love watching his stuff, and he's a physicist, and he calls it the larger information system, and he's very atheist in the sense that most people would consider atheist. Doesn't believe in religion, doesn't believe in God, and says that point blank. But he does believe in a larger consciousness system that we are all part of and participating in.
Yeah.
So back to my example, you got one person over here, they never experienced anything. You got me, for whatever reason, I started experiencing stuff as a child, and it never quit, even after I left Christianity, much to my chagrin at the time. So who's right? So I think that's what we struggle with in our culture and in our society. And so here's how I would answer that. And here's what I would say to that. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Derrick. If the only thing you understand about Gnosis is that it's self-experiential knowledge, and you really pay attention and honor your experiences, and you allow life to provide you with a feedback loop of what's working for you and what's not working for you, I think you're golden. I think you're a Gnostic. I think you're following Gnosis. Well, Aaron, you believe in higher power. This other person over here, they don't believe in anything except because, so, how could that work? Well, here's what I would say. I definitely went through, thanks to somebody I know that wouldn't quit making formidable arguments to me. I went through a phase where I would have to say I'm not an atheist because of my past experiences, but based on these arguments and based on everything I'm hearing and all this stuff, I'm living as a practical atheist. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So living as a practical atheist, what I mean is didn't go to church, didn't read the Bible, didn't pray, didn't believe in anything, wondered if there was any, believed in anything esoteric, wondered if there was life after death, that kind of stuff. No, maybe there's not. And for me, that did not work. For me, if I were to compare the two, just for me, life in the dogma of Christianity with the life and the experiences that I had then, and I'm talking about inwardly. I'm not talking about externally, because my external circumstances in terms of my possessions, my belongings, how much money I make, the relationships that I have, that hasn't changed. That's remained constant and consistent, right?
Yep.
But my internal experience, the joy that I feel, the satisfaction that I feel, the sense of service and purpose that I have, and the way I choose to get up every morning and live my life, and the way I feel when I choose to get up in the morning and live my life. If I were to compare my most dogmatic, fundamentalist Christian years with this sort of atheistic, naturalistic approach that I took to life, even though I didn't intellectually, or I didn't consent to it or confess to it, I was still living it. And if I were to take the quality of life, I would go back 1,000 times to dogmatic Christianity. I would go back every day and 5 times on Sunday to dogmatic Christianity, because in my experience, I was more joyful. In my experience, I was more peaceful. In my experience, I was more satisfied. I had more purpose. I had more spring in my step. So for me to adopt physicalist beliefs, even if it's true, even if they could somehow absolutely prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that it's true, my life would be miserable, and it was miserable. So therefore, I'm using my experience as my feedback loop to follow my own path. And so one of the problems that we get into in modern day age is people are locked into Aristotelian logic and philosophy that they don't even know they're locked into. And we're following more of an Aristotelian path in the West than, say, a Platonic path in the West. Because Aristotelian logic is it has to be true or false. It has to be either or. The house is either red or the house is blue.
Dualistic or binary.
Unless you're colorblind.
Which I am, by the way.
Are you really?
I am.
Well, that explains a lot about your wardrobe. No, I'm just you're always dressed sharp, man. But does that make sense?
Yep. It makes perfect sense. And let me say this too, is that I think that, I was listening to something earlier today and was talking about dualism, right? And how we, philosophy tends to lend itself to, dualistic understanding, right? But let's say that we begin to introduce some nuance to this, right? That everything is not necessarily either or. We could have like a Boolean type of logic where there is an and not, which is called a NAND, right? And it makes things make sense because it adds some nuance to things that we ordinarily like say this is this or that. But the one thing that how can I say this? The one thing that really helped me out in life, period, right, is learning how to hold on to things loosely.
Yeah.
Now, one of my challenges, and and May has pointed this out, it's a blind spot that I have, that I get to be dogmatic about things. Like when I think I'm right, I really think I'm right.
Yeah.
And then I become kind of dogmatic about things. And the reality is that, okay, I was once a Christian. I was once sold out, bona fide. Listen, I had Jesus tattooed on me, but what I learned was that everything that I knew, everything that I believed, everything that I held dear or sacred, I said, okay, it may or may not be this or that. So I learned to hold on to things loosely. It's like outside of my wife, you're my best friend, right? But I hold on to that loosely. It's like I'm not clinging to you. And if you
Right.
have a change in your philosophy, then all of a sudden, well, I don't like Aaron anymore. No, I hold on to this loosely because I have to give you the license to change as I give myself the license to change. And so what I would like to ask our audience is when you talk about beliefs, what beliefs have you outgrown? What beliefs are you afraid to question? What belief, if you released it, might make room for a deeper knowing? And that's what Gnosis demands, right? Because like for me, the belief of heaven and hell, that was a belief that I had to I let go of. The belief that that tithing is important to spiritual growth. The belief that that we have to believe on this crucifixion and resurrection model, to be redeemed from all of these things. And I used to be really dogmatic about these things, but I learned, like, okay, hold on to it loosely because something else may come that may displace what it is that you believe today. And so I've used this analogy before, and I'm going to use it again. But if you're like doing an obstacle course and you're going over ladder bars, as you're going from one rung to the next, you have to let go of the previous rung in order to swing to the next one. You have to let go of some shit in order to progress and to move forward. And so what are those things? What are some of those things? Like I said, the belief in the literal hell, the belief in the literal Satan, the belief in in tithing,
Yeah.
but having prayer time and getting into the presence of God. All of these things, these are things that over time, because I practiced them faithfully. I was very faithful about it. I was faithful about not just doing it, but teaching it, sharing it, right? But I learn to let go of these things. So Aaron, first, like, I'll ask you, like, what kind of beliefs have you outgrown? What do you have any beliefs that you're afraid to question? And what belief, if you release it, might make room for a deeper knowing?
Yeah. Well, I think to answer that last part, what I've released that's allowed for deeper knowing has been the dogma of Christianity, because I thought I was having these results because of the scriptures, because of my faith. And
Mm-hmm.
I was teaching other people, although not to the degree as already addressed that a healing evangelist generally was. But, if you believe these things, then you can have these things too. And then had to let go of all of that and realize, no, this is a direct connection, with what I call divine, with what Thomas Campbell calls the larger consciousness system.
Yep.
It's what some people call their higher power, some people call it their higher self, some people call it source, some people, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
So yeah, I had to release all of that stuff, right? And then as far as like what belief am I open to having challenged? So I believe
I believe.
that what holds us back from achieving is our current level of belief. So if I don't believe I can, let's be honest, I don't believe I can become a billionaire, right?
I believe you can, but that's another thing.
Yeah, that's going to prevent me from even trying.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So I welcome having that belief challenge. You mentioned a blind spot that you have that may or may not be accurate. I don't know. I wouldn't know. I want those things.
Yeah.
Just like if I was changing lanes and about to, wreck into somebody.
Yep.
And I got a passenger or somebody says, hey, don't, or I'm pulling out in an intersection, I don't see a car coming. They're like, stop, or I'm not over here. And you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So the things that I'm blind to, I want to have those things challenged.
Yeah.
So it would take a lot at this point of experiential knowledge for me to lose faith in spirituality, higher self, source, the divine, larger consciousness system, or whatever. I don't know, but I really, really was since with all sincerity. You laid that challenge out. I'll never forget. We were talking on the phone, and for some reason I was driving, which is very unusual. And that's one of the reasons I probably remember it. But you told me, if you've not seriously considered atheism, you haven't
deconstructed.
And that was the one thing that for me was just ridiculous. What wasn't even on the table for me. And people might say, well, Aaron, you still sound like you think it's ridiculous or you didn't seriously consider it. And I'm just going to tell you, I have. You can take my word for it or not take my word for it. I walked that path.
I know that you've considered it.
And so I think it's important, again, the difference between belief, like religious belief, and gnosis experience is that we are open to the feedback that life provides for us. And we don't become dogmatic in the sense that if something appears to me in my life that might change those beliefs, I'm going to automatically dismiss it out of hand. And I'll give you an example. I know psychic readings are real.
Mm-hmm.
I know they are.
Yep.
I know astrology works. Now that's going to sound crazy. I know I sound crazy, unintellectual, and all that stuff when I say astrology works. But I'm going to tell you something. I was just talking to somebody on Friday that was kind of into it, and they pulled up my natal chart, and I've had my natal chart read 7 or 8 times, and they all come. And this guy didn't know anything, didn't have time to Google me. I've done it at fairs where they didn't have time to Google me, And every single time, if the person actually knows what they're doing, or hell, even an app or an AI knows what it's doing, they're going to describe me to a T. I don't think that's coincidence, right?
Yeah.
So that's based on my experience. But I promise you, there are people out there that say astrology is bullshit, and they've never looked into it, and they've never had somebody that knows what they're doing read their natal chart and interpret it for them. So they have absolutely no experience, and they will shut me out outright. Or if they have some kind of paranormal experience, they will immediately say that doesn't exist. All that exists is the natural. So therefore, there is a logical, reasonable, rational. The supernatural can be logical, reasonable, and rational. Something like that. There is some explanation for why this didn't happen, right? So you're holding on to your beliefs to the degree that you are not allowing life to be your teacher.
Right.
And I think to me, that's the crux of the problem.
No, yeah, that's you said a mouthful right there. It's like when you get to the point where you say, okay, I'm so dogmatic that I'm not going to allow life to teach me. I'm not going to allow any experience to change me, right? And people get hung up on that. They're just like, no, I believe what I believe. And and so, like I said, the big thing for me is that I've learned to let go. I've learned that not everything is a hill to die on. And those things that are not a hill to die on, I'm not going to die on them. But the one thing that I will do is that I will allow superior information to displace the information that I hold.
Yeah, and I think. I hope I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Let's go through comments. You good to go through comments?
Absolutely.
So first one I see up here, I don't even want to voice this one, but I'm gonna. Carl Forehand says, "Are y'all protesting tomorrow?" So I'll give my answer first. I didn't know there was a protest. Number one. Number two, it's my son's golden birthday, and my entire day is planned out celebrating my birthday with my son, and that's way more important to me in my life and my personal satisfaction. So no, I will not be protesting whatever we're supposed to be protesting tomorrow. That's my answer to that. I'll let you answer for
Carl, and Carl, that's a very good. And let me say this about Carl, because Carl is like what you call an ally.
He is.
I've had interactions with other Black folks that when Carl and Laura were talking about Black Lives Matter, and they kind of went in on them. I'm like, listen, guys, these are not the people to go in on, because they're allies. You don't shit on your allies. You don't shit on your friends, right? People that are trying, they're putting their intellectual, social capital at risk. So I have absolute utmost respect for Carl and Laura. That being said, Carl, I protest Trump every day.
Just follow him on Facebook.
Well, yeah, it's like, am I going to call out something specific tomorrow? No, I hope it rains to the point where it floods Washington D.C. and anything that he tries to do militarily will float down Pennsylvania Avenue and go careening into the White House gates. That's what I hope. But
Yeah. All right. So Jimmy says you can't trust the Old Testament. Let's see. I guess I can show these. You can't trust the Old Testament or the New Testament. It's bullshit. Full stop. I get what he's saying. I wouldn't go that far. I don't know that I want to take time to go there, though.
Now that's a show all by itself.
A show all in of itself. As is this. Probably I'm struggling giving a shit about mythical crap again. I love Jimmy. I understand where he's coming from, and I totally understand that conclusion.
So Jimmy, let me say this about that, right? If you step away from the mythical and look at it in the mystical, I think that it'll give you a better perspective. Now I get it, because like Jimmy's very rational, and he's a naturalist, a materialist, and I don't knock that, but at the same time, don't divorce yourself of the energy that's within you, right? Don't that there is something to that. There is something to be discerned. There is something to be learned. Whether you frame that as like God, spirituality, or whatever, okay, you can call it energy and attempt to measure it through quantum physics or quantum mechanics, and I'm good with that, but there's more to us than just this meat sack that we live in.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. Again, Jimmy, I have a question. Why the hell is the Gospels of the Bible more important than any other scripture from any other religion? You want to take a stab at that, Derrick?
Yeah, this is the simple thing, Jimmy, is that the Gospels are more important. And let me say this: I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm gonna piss off some of my atheist friends that the Gospels are important because they chronicle the life of Jesus. And that if you're going to have a belief system called Christianity or Christianity, and you're going to be a Christian, then the teachings of the Christ have to be important, and I would say even more important. Now, I'm on record as saying that on my exodus from Christianity, that I became a very Marcionite. In other words, I thought that the Old Testament was complete bullshit, and that basically everything from Matthew forward is all that really mattered, with the exception of Hebrews, which I would throw that one out too. But that's me, right? So I get it, Jimmy. Like if you're looking at it from a flat rendered atheistic perspective, yeah, it's all bullshit. But if you're adding some nuance to it, and you're saying, okay, I'm not going to be totally atheistic about this, I'm gonna take a more agnostic approach, then you say, okay, I can understand why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are more important, and the Gnostic books that we're discussing now.
Yeah, I would say that I think there is value in ancient testimony as it relates to what it means to be a human being. And why would I honor the New Testament scriptures more than the Hindu scriptures, the Vedic scriptures, shamanic indigenous traditions? I'm mostly Scottish, the Druid beliefs. The reason is because I was born in the West, and this is the culture in which I'm the most familiar.
Yeah.
So I'm not a Hindu. I wasn't raised with a family that worshiped 1,000 family gods and personal gods and city gods and country gods and whatever else. So that's completely foreign to me. I wasn't born in Tibet.
Right.
I had the option to just go sit in a cave somewhere and meditate, right?
Yeah.
I'm a Western person. So what I believe is that we were left testimonies through philosophy, left testimonies through what people consider to be holy scripture, left testimonies, and it depends on your culture. So to say, is one better than the other? Absolutely. For me, the Gospels are better for me than the Vedic traditions or the Buddhist texts because of who I am and the fact that I'm born here in the West. Now, it would be ridiculous for me to try to go to Tibet and invade a Tibetan monastery and try to preach the gospel to them and get them to accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior. That would be absolutely asinine.
Yeah.
So that's how I would answer that question.
Come on in here. No, come here.
Here's a good one. I want
Maya has a question.
Oh, okay.
Or comment.
Tommy, I'll get back to you. Nope.
Well, Tommy has said something here. He says, in my experience, that's not quite what atheists mean when we say we don't believe.
Yep.
Right. And so you get man, we're the psychic bond is working.
I'm gonna address that because I know it's really strong, and I'm not trying to be hurtful. I'm trying to be helpful because no one can live without beliefs. So I understand, if the church says, I think somewhere in another comment, they're responding. He says we're responding. Let's see if this is it. I think a lot of us use belief in it as a response to how it's used by Christians.
Yeah.
And I get that, but when you use that term, I think it can be very, very confusing when you say, I don't believe in anything. If you don't believe what Christians believe, then you can say, I don't believe in that. And here's why. But when you go overboard with it and say, I don't believe in anything, I think it seriously, seriously discredits what you have to say. And I don't want it to be discredited because I think you have a lot of substance in what you're presenting. And I think by just speaking haphazardly in that way, that it discredits the message.
So let me throw something about about this, because I will say I don't believe in anything, but I do believe things.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that it's a difference, because I'm not believing in something as a rule and guide to my life. I just, I believe that this is, I believe that, like, for example, I believe that some people are nice people, and I believe that some people are assholes. That's a belief that I have, and I could be wrong. It could be that everybody's an asshole, or it could be everybody's nice,
or everybody's a mixture of both. That's probably close.
Exactly.
Here, I gotta pop this one up, Maya, and this is where we differ. I have no idea what this is. Do you know
what is this, baby?
Talking about being released when people die, that it's not an answer to a prayer. I differ. That's what I was saying. That's where we differ at, because I don't believe that. That's not my belief.
No, but you don't believe that it's healing either.
I do believe it is healing.
Ooh.
It is a form of healing.
I believe that it's a release. I believe that it's the end of suffering. But is it a healing? No.
That entity is healed from hurt and harm. It's not the way you would have wanted it or you anticipated it, but it doesn't make it or negate that it happened nonetheless.
Okay.
So you can't put the guardrails on it of your own perception of, okay, healing is this person has cancer, so he's going to be cured of cancer. No, maybe his body was too ravished, and the healing is releasing that entity from that pain. That's the healing.
If you say like that's a spiritual healing, then yeah, I would. I can
put quantifiers on it.
It's not healing. I can concede that if you say it's a spiritual healing, but if you say it's a physical healing, it's not.
You didn't say physical, or you didn't quantify.
No, because
you can't go back now and then change the call of the question.
Your Honor, I object. No, I'm just kidding.
Lord, this woman that you gave me.
She's leading the witness.
I'm going to go eat my Chinese food.
Okay.
Man, I love that. I love that. I think, thank you for that.
This is what happens when you marry a lawyer.
That was a great moment. Let's see what ping pong says here. It seems that you're seeking your power and position. Be careful that your will be done. I don't understand that comment, Derrick.
Yeah, you know what? Here, let me say this, right? At the end of the day, the only power and position you have is that which you amass for yourself. At the end of the day, and the whole thing about I get mad when people say, oh, you're trying to take the position of God. Okay, then you're assuming that God exists, and I'm not saying that God doesn't exist. That's my personal belief, but for the sake of this discussion, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if you assume that you've taken a dogmatic position and say that God is here and that you can't put your belief over this, so now you've created a dogmatic condition, right? But if you say, okay, God is consciousness, and I'm free to operate. I'm a free range moral agent in this field. Okay, yeah, I get that. And at that point, I'm not usurping God, so to speak.
Yeah, I want to address this one. Tommy says, I'm trying to outgrow the belief that if there's something weird or odd about me, or I don't do things the way others do, it's because there is something wrong with me. Yeah, I just encourage you on that journey, Tommy. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with you at all. And I think we all face a challenge in different ways of facing opposition or looking for affirmation from without, and eventually that wears out. Like, we all have to come to grips with our own uniqueness and values and direction and choices that we're making without needing validation from everybody else around us. So I would just encourage you in that. I gotta post this one. I love this. Astrology is bullshit, Aaron. Oh wow. Okay.
Can I
changed my mind.
take a shot at this
That
real
comment,
quick?
I changed my mind. No, I love it.
So it's like when we talk about the ages, right? And we talk about astrology and the ages, right? That there is clearly a transition into this age of Aquarius. That there is something there, and the way the stars and planets are aligned relative to us, and again, this is why I think astrology is a thing, because how celestial bodies align to a physical point in time. We're here on the earth. This is a physical point in time, right? Would the same astrology impact Martians? No, because it's in a different place in time, right? But do these things, just like we know that the tides have an impact on, or we know that the moon impacts tides, and that impacts the flow of water. It impacts seismic activity. It impacts how things grow. It impacts our personalities, right? These are scientific. There's some robust scientific theory behind it. So what I used to I used to say that astrology is bullshit too, but then when you look at it, when you look at how times, seasons, celestial bodies, how they affect the planet, and they affect how life is expressed and how it's expressed in our individual lives, I can say that I don't understand it fully, but I've learned not to dismiss it out of hand.
All right, Mark. Daniel David says semantics. I assume that comment was about the difference between like belief and dogma.
Mm-hmm.
And all I would say is, if communication is important to you, connecting with people is important to you, and being understood by people is important to you, semantics absolutely matter.
Yep. Yeah, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it, in the context, and when you say it. It makes a difference.
Tommy says, I have more to say about how a lot of us use belief, but it's more than it's more than my thumbs can muster at the moment. Amen, brother.
It's like after you get to like glass 3 or 4 of wine, it does become a bit of a challenge.
So then finally, last comment that I see, he says, I don't usually say I don't believe in anything, though if I do, I'm trying to be provocative, obnoxious. Okay. If that's the goal, to be provocative and obnoxious, then I'd say, yeah, it's a great pragmatic use of those terms. If the goal is to connect and be understood with people that you might be trying to reach with your message, then I would suggest there's a better way.
Yep. And I'm trying to learn how to be better with that, Aaron.
It really depends. Like, if your goal, listen, I went through a time on Facebook where I was just pissed off at the world.
Yeah.
And I was using the block button like 5 times a day. And I was just going out there, and I knew I was like, this is therapeutic for me. I'm trying to piss you off.
Yeah.
But then, motivations change. So if your goal is to be provocative and piss people off and push back, then use as provocative language as possible. And I will say this, that there are psychological studies that show that in order for significant change to occur in someone's life, it is usually preceded by an offense. And so by creating an emotional charge with an offensive statement, you can plant a seed in someone that later on can germinate and develop. But I don't know. That's just not the strategy I would employ. So that's what I would say about that.
Yep.
I don't know. I'm sure there were comments that we missed that I can't see for some reason. I've never figured that out, but
yeah. The other thing too, for anybody that if we missed your comments and you have something that you want to say, or if you're watching this on replay, by all means, send us an inbox. We'd love to hear it. And one of the things I like to incorporate in future episodes is where we have like a mailbag session, where we actually answer some questions, or maybe we take some of the subject matter from a question and use that to formulate an episode.
Yep, that would be great. All right, Derrick. Love you, man. It's great. Great
too, man.
Content. I'm glad we're doing this. So you've been watching the Gnostic Agnostics, everybody.
Yes. And may you question what you were told and always remember what you always knew.
Oh, I like that. How'd you say that? Say that again.
Yeah. May you question what you were told and remember what you always knew.
I love that. All right, everybody. We will see you next week. Thanks for joining in, participating in the discussion. I love a spirited conversation. So I really appreciate